Hello and welcome to our Energy Connect studio at the Global Energy Show 2023. I'm really glad to have sitting next to me Brent Lakeman, Director of Hydrogen Initiative at Edmonton Global. Brent, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what is the size of the hydrogen opportunity in Canada, Alberta and Edmonton as well, obviously?
Sure, well, I mean, it's a huge opportunity globally. We talk about a potentially $11 trillion opportunity as we look to decarbonize really all sectors of the economy, and hydrogen obviously plays a very important role for many sectors, many jurisdictions. So for Canada, our Canadian hydrogen strategy talks about a $100 billion opportunity by 2050. So that's pretty significant. Yeah. And for our region, Edmonton, Alberta first produces about 2/3 of Canada's hydrogen, and within Alberta, the Edmonton region produces about 2/3 of that total. So we're the largest hydrogen producer today in Canada. So when we look at the economic benefits for Canada, we think a lot of that can really be focused in our region as an early mover in the hydrogen economy.
It's really good to hear, Brendan. What roles do hydrogen hubs play to help realise this economic opportunity, and what hubs do you have in Edmonton then?
Yeah, so we're seeing hubs around the world. Sometimes they're called hydrogen valleys, hydrogen hubs. We were an early leader actually in setting up a hydrogen hub in Edmonton. It's been operational now for over 2 years. Hydrogen hubs in the United States are really just getting started through some of the funding supports through their government. We see some hydrogen valleys in parts of Europe, in Germany, Netherlands, UK. So we're watching that closely, but we think the Edmonton region's a really interesting example of a very mature hydrogen hub where we produce some of the world's lowest cost hydrogen today, and now very low carbon hydrogen. So it's really about now how do you make use of that hydrogen and get it into the economy, create more demand in different sectors of it. So that's really what the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub is up to. It's working on building more demand, initially focused on the mobility sector. We have a lot of really interesting pilot projects taking place across, I call it planes, trains, and automobiles, but whether it's bus demonstration pilots, truck demonstrations, aviation applications, everything's really happening in the Edmonton region. So we think this is the place to continue to scale that. So now we're kind of going from these pilot projects to looking at how do we get 5,000 hydrogen vehicles on the road in the next 5 years. So pretty ambitious targets, but we're looking at all of our sectors and stakeholders coming together around that, whether it's municipalities, whether it's the trucking sector, commercial bus fleets. All of those groups are taking really significant actions to get hydrogen into those mobility systems, whether it's hydrogen fuel cell technology, but also dual fuel technologies.
It's really interesting, Brett. And what do you think you've learned? You said, mature over 2 years, starting the pilot projects and making them bigger, but have you learned anything you can tell other hubs or valleys out there?
Well, I think we're learning that the technologies are available today. We have companies, whether it's global companies or even Edmonton companies, bringing these technologies forward. So the technologies clearly work. It's scaling them is the challenge, and there's still costs associated with that and competing with other conventional technologies. So we know over time the price of hydrogen will be very economic compared to the price of diesel, but we're not there today. So we may need more government supports. And I think what we've learned is government has a lot of programs, great programs in many ways, but they're not necessarily always designed to scale quickly, scale rapidly at the numbers we're talking about. So when we talk about 5,000 vehicles, programs today don't really allow you to bring forward a 5,000 vehicle initiative. You might get 10 vehicles or 20 vehicles. So how do we work closely with government around this transformational change that can happen? And hubs play a real key role in that, because that's really where you're beginning to aggregate this demand.
Yes, and obviously, how do you feel that you can sort of compete with other jurisdictions? Let's say look at the US and what they're doing around the IRA bill. So do you see Canada stepping up on the government level, trying to give incentives, and then also what different regions are doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think everyone thinks, the IRA, the U.S. is so far ahead, and in some respects, that was a major shift forward for the U.S. government. But Canada, the federal government, provincial governments are really all working closely to remain competitive. It just means the incentives might look a little bit different in Canada compared to the U.S. They have production-based incentives. We have investment tax credits, but now we also have an interest in things like the contract for differences approach, where you can lock down the value of some of these offsets that you're creating through things like carbon capture and storage. And my understanding is with these new systems being put in place, with this last federal budget, that will make us just as competitive as the United States. But it's difficult to understand. We don't always understand these differences in systems. We look for that one incentive, and in our case, it's kind of a combination of incentives, regulatory tools that all come together to make us very competitive. We can produce hydrogen at probably the lowest cost in the world in the Edmonton region from our natural gas, from our carbon capture and storage expertise. So that's our starting point, is we want to remain the lowest cost producer in the world.
And just before we go, I assume that gives you an advantage of, as you said, companies maybe coming to seek out to start pilots in Edmonton, that advantage of the low cost of it must mean that you're getting a lot inundated with requests?
We are. I mean, we get a lot of excitement. People think of Canada as a hydrogen leader, and then that quickly becomes what's happening in the Edmonton region. So whether it's new technologies to produce hydrogen, we have all types, all shapes and sizes and colors, unfortunately, but from methane pyrolysis technologies, autothermal reforming technologies, electrolyzers, all of those technologies will have a role in this ecosystem that we're creating. But what we're also trying to do is build out that entire supply chain of companies that are needed to have these technologies put in place and to use them. So it's not always just the production technologies, it's that whole supporting ecosystem, the infrastructure, the talent that we want to have in place over the next 20 years to really make this significant change.
Well, very interesting to hear, Brent. And just before we go, we're here at the Global Energy Show. What's the importance of shows like this to bring everyone together, also to hear what other regions and areas are doing in this field? Yeah,
no, these shows play a critical role. The Global Energy Show, the Canadian Hydrogen Convention, all of those events are the gathering place and really getting Canada and certainly my region on the radar. So having that convening of everyone from around the world, when we have tens, 20s, 50s, hundreds of countries I should say, coming together to really understand the opportunity. So even just for me today in Calgary, meeting up with countries from around the world that want to hear more about what we're doing and do business with us.
Well, that's great to hear, Brent, and I appreciate you coming down to the Energy Connect studio.
Again, thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for watching, and I look forward to bringing more studio interviews from the show floor in the coming days.